One might look back upon the early days of the American continent and hear not a roar, but a quiet, persistent hum. It was the sound of industry, not of factories, but of individuals. This was the sound of an axe striking timber, a fishing line being cast into a stream, a needle pulling thread through homespun cloth. It was the rhythm of a people who understood self-reliance not as a virtue to be praised, but as the very air they breathed. In this vast and untamed landscape, survival was a direct conversation between a person and the natural world. There was no intermediary, no one to ask for permission to live. Consider the hunter. He did not wake before dawn to fill out a form or purchase a tag. He simply took his rifle, his knowledge of the terrain, and his respect for the quarry, and ventured into the wilderness. The deer or turkey he brought home was not a recreational trophy. It was sustenance. It was the difference between a harsh winter and a comfortable one. His right to hunt was considered as natural and inherent as the right to breathe the air. It was a fundamental part of his ability to provide, an essential thread in the fabric of his independence. The same unwritten charter applied to the fisherman. The great rivers and coastal waters of the continent teemed with life, a seemingly endless bounty available to anyone with a net or a line. A family living by a river could depend on it for a significant portion of their diet. There were no seasonal restrictions dictated by a distant bureaucracy, no catch limits calculated on a spreadsheet. Building a home was perhaps the ultimate expression of this self-directed life. A pioneer could select a plot of land, fell the trees with his own hands, and, with the help of his community, raise a shelter. The quality of the home was ensured by the most powerful incentive of all. The builder and his family had to live in it. This process was not merely construction. It was an act of creation, a profound declaration of independence. The transition from this state of rugged autonomy to our modern, highly regulated world was not a sudden event. It was a slow, almost imperceptible creep, like a vine gradually enveloping a mighty oak. The first threads of the regulatory web were spun with the best of intentions. As towns grew into cities and the nation became more crowded and complex, new challenges arose. The Gilded Age of the late 19th century, with its rapid industrialization, brought with it concerns about public health, safety, and the unchecked power of large corporations. It was here that the nature of government began to fundamentally shift. The idea emerged that the government had a role to play, not just in protecting liberty, but in protecting people from the hazards of a modernizing society. This new philosophy gained momentum during the Progressive Era and was later supercharged by the Great Depression and the New Deal. The scale of national crisis seemed to demand a scale of government intervention never before seen. The belief took hold that a central authority could and should manage the economy, smooth out the boom and bust cycles, and provide a safety net for its citizens. As the regulatory state expanded, a subtle but profound shift occurred in the relationship between the citizen and the state. The default assumption began to change. Where once an individual was presumed to have the right to act unless a law expressly forbade it, a new paradigm emerged. In ever more areas of life, one was now presumed to have no right to act until the government granted permission. The consequences of this shift were most keenly felt by ordinary people trying to provide for themselves and their families. The aspiring entrepreneur, who once needed only a good idea and a willingness to work, now faced a labyrinth of licenses, zoning laws, and tax regulations. For many, the dream of starting a small business, the quintessential act of American self-reliance, was extinguished not by market forces, but by the sheer weight of administrative compliance. Even the most basic acts of subsistence, once taken for granted, became entangled in the regulatory web. Hunting and fishing, the ancient practices of putting food on the table, were transformed into recreational activities managed by the state. Complicated rulebooks emerged, dictating not only when and where one could hunt or fish, but what species, what size, what gender, and with what specific type of equipment. The effect was to turn a fundamental right to feed oneself into a privilege to be purchased from the government. To understand this transformation, one need only look at the simple act of building a home. Let us consider the story of the early American log cabin. A settler would find a suitable stand of trees on his land. He would fell them himself, notch them with skill passed down through generations, and raise the walls. The roof might be made of split shakes, the gaps chinked with moss and clay. The entire structure was a product of the immediate environment and the builder's own labor. It was a testament to resourcefulness. The home was not judged by an inspector with a clipboard, but by its ability to keep the family warm and dry through the winter. Its success was its permit. Now let us observe the modern equivalent. Imagine a person today who wishes to build a small, simple cabin on a piece of rural land they own, using timber from that same land. Their journey does not begin with an axe, but with a mountain of paperwork. First, they must contend with zoning laws that dictate what can be built, where it can be placed, and even its minimum square footage. They will likely need to hire a licensed surveyor to map the property, and an architect or engineer to draw up plans that conform to dozens of pages of international building codes. These codes specify everything from the thickness of the insulation to the type of nails that must be used. The contrast is, honestly, pretty stark. The pioneer's cabin was an exercise in self-reliance. The modern cabin is an exercise in compliance. The former required knowledge of nature and craft. The latter requires knowledge of bureaucracy and the financial resources to hire a team of certified experts. The very act of providing shelter for oneself, once a symbol of ultimate freedom, has become one of the most heavily regulated activities in modern life. The codebook, written with the intention of ensuring safety, has, in practice, become an insurmountable wall for the individual who simply wishes to build a modest home with their own two hands. Here we find a most curious phenomenon, a deep and perplexing paradox at the heart of modern American society. On one hand, the ethos of self-reliance is still celebrated. It is woven into the nation's founding myths and praised by leaders across the political spectrum. Yet, on the other hand, the very government that espouses this ideal has systematically dismantled the machinery that makes genuine self-reliance possible. The government, through its rhetoric, asks for a nation of eagles, capable of soaring independently. But through its regulations, it has created a system more suited to raising chickens in a carefully managed coop. The message becomes hopelessly mixed. You must be self-reliant, but you may not act in the ways that self-reliance requires. This paradox places the modern citizen in an impossible position. They are judged by the standards of their pioneer ancestors, while being denied the freedoms those ancestors took for granted. The expectation remains, but the tools have been taken away. Beyond the practical and economic barriers, this steady erosion of self-reliance carries a deeper, more subtle cost. It places a burden on the human spirit. For much of our history as a species, our survival and well-being were directly linked to our competence. The ability to solve problems, to build, to grow, to provide. These actions are not just about physical sustenance. They are fundamental to our sense of worth, agency, and dignity. The regulatory state, in its quest for safety and order, chips away at this foundation. By inserting itself as a mandatory intermediary in almost every productive activity, it denies people the opportunity to experience this profound sense of accomplishment. It fosters a culture of learned helplessness, where the first instinct in the face of a challenge is not to ask, "What can I do?" but rather, "Who must I ask for permission?" When the paths to meaningful, independent action are blocked by red tape, people may simply cease to try. Why learn the skills to build a shed if the permitting process is too daunting? Why attempt to start a small food business from your kitchen if the health codes are impossibly complex? The human spirit, like a muscle, needs resistance and challenge to grow strong. A world designed to eliminate all risk and channel all activity through official approval is a world that ultimately weakens the very character it claims to admire. And so we end our observation here with a gentle word directed toward those who occupy the great halls of government. Look upon the people of this nation. You ask them to be strong, to be resilient, to embody the spirit of self-reliance that is their inheritance. You call upon this spirit in times of trouble and hold it up as the ideal. But one must understand a simple ecological truth. You cannot expect a forest to thrive after you have diverted the streams that water it. You cannot expect a bird to fly after you have clipped its wings. And you cannot expect a people to be self-reliant after you have systematically regulated away their ability to act for themselves. The web of permits, licenses, codes, and fees, woven over a century with the best of intentions, has become a trap. Consider the deep contradiction at the heart of your policies. You have made it a crime to catch a fish in a certain stream to feed one's family, but you lament the dependency of those who cannot feed themselves. You have made it prohibitively expensive and complex for a man to build his own simple home, but you decry the crisis of homelessness. You cannot have it both ways. You must choose. Do you want a people who are truly self-reliant, or do you want a people who are perfectly managed? For you cannot, in the end, have both.